On April 2nd, 2025, at a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas, 17-year-old Austin Metcalf was stabbed during a routine rain delay by a 19-year-old he'd never spoken to before that afternoon. The weapon wasn't a hunting knife. It wasn't a gun. It was a 3.5-inch serrated blade folded inside an everyday multi-tool, the kind that sits in a junk drawer in half the houses in America. That's the detail that should stop you before anything else does. What followed should have been one of the most heavily broadcast murder trials in Texas history. Instead, District Judge John Roach Jr. did something almost no one expected. He banned every camera, every live stream, every recorder from his courtroom. Not partially, completely. The internet filled in the blanks with its own theories, a cover-up, a favor, a fix. But what was the judge actually protecting? And was it the public he was shielding? Or something else entirely? Less than 3 hours later, a jury came back with a guilty verdict and a 35-year sentence. 3 hours in a trial this complicated, with this much public pressure riding on it. Was that justice moving fast or moving too fast? And underneath all of it sits one detail almost nobody talked about. Austin Metcalf didn't go to that track meet alone. He went with his twin brother standing beside him, the person who'd been there since before either of them could remember. What does it do to a person to lose the other half of himself in a courtroom that never even let a camera see it happen? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that courtroom was hiding, why the jury moved as fast as it did, and the one thing about Austin Metcalf the cameras would have missed even if they'd been rolling. The rain hadn't stopped yet. It was still coming down when this happened. Here's what that camera ban was actually protecting. Most of the people who saw this happen were teenagers. Some were just 15 years old. Judge Roach didn't want their faces live streamed before they ever took the stand, so he banned every camera. He let in only as many people as the gallery could hold. Some families lined up outside in the dark before sunrise, just for a seat. That's the secret. There wasn't one. Just a courtroom trying to protect kids from becoming the internet's next target. Now here's what those kids actually watched happen. You're under a team tent, sheltering from the storm with people you've never met. Anthony walks over. For a few minutes, it's easy, even friendly. Then someone asks him to leave. He stays. They ask again. He stays again. Then he says something strange. Touch me and see what happens. His hand is already inside his backpack. Hunter Metcalf, yes, that twin brother, is standing closest. Austin steps in next. You don't have anything in that backpack, he says. It's Frisco. He grabs Anthony just to move him along. Anthony pulls a folding knife from inside that backpack. One motion. A single flick of the thumb opens the blade. He stabs Austin once in the chest. Then he runs. He doesn't stay. He doesn't check on Austin. He doesn't call for help. Austin runs the opposite direction, both hands pressed to his own chest. He's holding himself together the way you'd hold something coming apart. He tells everyone nearby to go get help. By the time police reach him, he isn't breathing. Athletic trainers are already performing chest compressions. Here's what's strange. That knife wasn't even illegal. Texas law only restricts blades over 5.5 inches. This one measured 3.5. It only became a problem the second it left the backpack. He ran, and the next words anyone heard from him weren't an explanation. They were a question. Is he going to be okay? There's a number you need to hear. How many separate times witnesses say he was told to leave? Before any of this happened, Once you hear it, the self-defense story gets a lot harder to believe. More than 10 times. That's how many separate times witnesses say people under that tent asked Karmelo Anthony to leave. He didn't just stay. Witnesses say he started cursing at the group, daring them to do something about it. Hunter Metcalf, Austin's twin, was actually the one who spoke up first. He asked Anthony to leave. Austin only stepped in after that. Here's where it gets complicated. The reach into that backpack, the actual threat, happened before anyone touched him. Not after. Before. "Touch me and see what happens," Anthony said. His hand was already inside the bag. 21. That's how many witnesses the prosecution eventually called to walk the jury through what happened next. Not one of those 21 people said Karmelo Anthony had nowhere left to go. The jury would eventually have to decide, using only those 21 accounts, whether trapped was ever really true. Somewhere under that tent, in the few seconds it takes to ask someone to move over, a decision was already being made that neither boy could undo. That detail should not matter. But it does, because the boy who first asked Anthony to leave wasn't a stranger to Austin. It was Hunter. They'd shared a womb, a bedroom, a football field, since before either of them could remember. Now Hunter has to carry being the first voice in a conversation that ended with his brother's death. Whether Anthony genuinely felt cornered in that exact second isn't something a police report can answer. That part still depends on what was happening inside his head, not just around him. If a weapon comes out before anyone's laid a hand on you, does what happens after even matter anymore? I'm genuinely curious where you land on that. By the time the rain let up and the meet resumed without him, Karmelo Anthony had already done the one thing that would define the rest of his life. He reached for a weapon before a single hand touched him. Whatever happened in the seconds after, the choice that mattered most had already been made under a team tent in Frisco, Texas. And yet, inside that courtroom, an entire legal fight was about to happen. It wasn't about what anyone under that tent actually felt. It was about what reasonable is still allowed to mean once a weapon is already in someone's hand. There's one line in how Judge Roach worded his jury instructions. The defense fought hard enough over it to get it written into the record for appeal. If that objection ever succeeds, everything you just heard might not be the end of this story. Somewhere in that same courtroom, Hunter still has to sit through it. Lawyers arguing over a sentence's exact wording for the death of the brother he was born 2 minutes ahead of. Austin Metcalf wasn't only a linebacker with a 3.97 GPA and a future in college football. He was the kid who'd sit down with a classmate struggling in algebra and just walk them through it. No fanfare, nothing expected back. Friends remember him as the loudest person in the stands at every one of his teammates' games, loud enough that it became its own running joke. That's the Austin Metcalf who existed before any of this. Karmelo Anthony was 19, the oldest of 4 kids, a team captain in 2 sports, a 3.7 GPA, 2 part-time jobs, no criminal record. He was weeks from graduating when this happened. A team captain in 2 sports, a 3.7 GPA, 2 jobs, no record. And weeks before graduation, he reached for a knife over an argument about tent space. Nobody flagged that knife before any of this. Nothing about a 3.5-inch folding blade trips a metal detector built for guns. School policy doesn't search backpacks for tools under 5.5 inches either. That's why no one knew he had it. Not because anyone missed something. Because there was nothing to catch. Here's the part that actually decided his sentence. Under Texas law, there's a path called sudden passion, acting under emotion so overwhelming you have no time to think. If the jury believed that, his sentence range drops to 2 to 20 years. If they didn't, he's looking at 5 years to life. Winning that argument meant convincing the jury Anthony had no time to think in that moment. But you already know the timeline. The threat came first. The reach for the backpack came first. Both happened before Austin or Hunter ever touched him. 12 jurors had to weigh that timeline against his mother's plea for mercy. They had to weigh it against everything in his life before that day. Then decide which range of punishment was even still possible. Austin had a laugh, his mother would later say, that filled whatever room he was in. A 19-year-old with no record, 2 jobs, a 3.7 GPA, and somehow this is where it ended. If that makes you pause, that's exactly the kind of case we keep digging into. Hit subscribe to Case Break Network. We're breaking cases, we're following every lead. And the next part of this one changes everything. 12 jurors went into that room with exactly 2 outcomes in front of them. Only one of those outcomes would let this still be argued as anything other than murder. What they decided next is the one part of this story nobody outside that room has heard yet. The defense already got their objection to those self-defense instructions written into the record for a possible appeal. If appellate judges read this instead of a jury, do you think they'd read that instruction the same way? Genuinely curious where you land. Before anyone spoke at the sentencing, a screen at the front of the courtroom played a montage of photographs. Austin and Hunter, growing up, side by side, in nearly every frame. Austin's mother once said all she has left of her son now is videos. It's possible Karmelo Anthony was genuinely terrified in that moment, even though the law ultimately decided that fear didn't justify what he did. Hunter asked first. Austin was the one who stood up and pushed Anthony out of the tent. That's the decision Austin Metcalf made. He stepped in and did the one thing his twin brother didn't have to do himself. It cost him his life. It may also be the very thing that finally brought justice for Austin Metcalf. Because that single, unarmed push is exactly what kept this from ever legally counting as self-defense. It's a Saturday morning in May, just weeks from now. Austin Metcalf walks across a stage in a cap and gown. He's scanning the crowd for his family before he even reaches the microphone. Somewhere that fall, he's pulling on a college football jersey for the first time. He's nervous in a way he never let anyone see at Memorial High. That night, he calls his twin brother, the way they always did, just to talk about nothing in particular. None of that happens. Austin Matthew Metcalf was 17 years old. Karmelo Anthony was convicted of his murder. He was sentenced to 35 years. A sentence already headed toward appeal over those jury instructions. Whatever the appellate courts decide about that camera ban trial, none of it changes one thing. A kitchen table in Frisco, Texas, sits empty every single morning. If you want to keep following this, the appeal, the legal fallout, all of it, that's what Case Break Network exists to do. We're breaking cases, and we're following every lead all the way through. Subscribe, and we'll bring you whatever comes next. Somewhere in Frisco, Texas, there's a bedroom door that hasn't opened in over a year. The twin who used to walk through it every morning isn't coming home. No verdict, no sentence, and no appeal will ever change that.